As Karen mentioned, my name is Christoph Cox. I teach philosophy and art theory at Hampshire. I'm also the incoming Dean of Faculty. And I'm sort of the MC for this event, which I'll mention in just a moment. What I wanted to do is say a few things about Hampshire's academic program, and then I'll introduce a new part of our program, what we're calling transdisciplinary seminar. We'll talk more about what that means. And then I want to have a discussion with 4 faculty who will be running one of these seminars next year. And I encourage all of you to join in with your comments, questions, and thoughts. You can present those questions in the chat. You can present those questions. You can just, speak. You can raise your hand in the Zoom way. So I'm going to make one note that a bunch of us have to leave exactly at 4. I'm teaching at 4, and I think maybe Will and Elizabeth have to too. So we'll probably depart exactly at 4. Okay, so let me just say that what I think is most distinctive about Hampshire's academic program is its flexibility and its creativity. It's easy to describe Hampshire in terms of what it's not. We don't give grades. We have no standard majors. We have no academic departments per se. But what's really valuable about all these things is the flexibility and the nimbleness and imagination that all of these things allow. At Hampshire, I've always thought that everything is possible and very little stands in your way without the barriers of departments or institutional structures that box us in. We're able to respond very quickly to what our students need and want, to exciting new conversations, to pressing issues. And we'll come to that in a second. Hampshire has been a kind of innovating and experimenting, that's the term we use, an experimenting institution from the very start. It's in our founding documents all over the place, experimenting, innovating. But over the years, many colleges have followed Hampshire in adopting interdisciplinarity, project-based curricula, etc. And so in preparation for our 50th anniversary, which is this year, which we'll be celebrating in the fall, we engaged in a community-wide process to kind of revise and renew our curriculum to make it even more what we're calling transdisciplinary, to blend disciplines together, to bring people, fields from all different kinds of parts of the curriculum together, to really think together, to collaborate together. Collaboration is a big piece of what we're doing here, trying to increase the collaborative nature of our curriculum, to allow students to collaborate with other students and faculty to collaborate with one another, faculty and staff. So everybody, engaged in a set of common projects. We're also trying to make sure that we fuse the academic stuff, what happens in the classroom, to student life, all the stuff that happens outside of class, and to bring those a little bit closer together. So one of the things that we're doing is to try to focus this new curriculum around contemporary issues and problems and themes. We'll see today how that might play out. All of this is to organize a curriculum that's very flexible, that will change every few years, maybe even every year, to respond to different issues, questions, student-driven needs, faculty, research interests, etc. Okay? One of the themes that we're centering on for this next year is media and technology. And within that theme, we'll be offering a first-year seminar, one of 4 different seminars that students will be taking. The one that we're going to be talking about today is a seminar on pandemics, surprisingly enough, co-taught by the 4 faculty we have here today. So let me ask each of the faculty members just quickly to introduce yourselves and your field. Maybe we can start with Elizabeth.
Sure. I'm Elizabeth Conlisk, and I came to Hampshire 20 years ago after working at the CDC for many years. I teach courses in the areas of epidemiology, public health, food studies, and global health mainly. There were a lot of reasons I wanted to come to work at Hampshire, but one of the main ones was that it gave me the freedom to teach courses that were topical and applied, and that I was really interested in, and to co-teach with faculty from other fields. So this Div 1 seminar on pandemics is a perfect example of that.
Great. Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Wald, and I teach history in what we now call the School of Critical Social Inquiry, used to be social science. And mostly what I work on is modern Europe, which for us, maybe not to you, but to us, it means the last 250 years or so. But actually, I also like earlier periods, the medieval period, the Renaissance, and others. So, what I enjoy about Hampshire, I think also, as Elizabeth said, is not being boxed in, because in most places there'd be a department and you got the French specialist and the German specialist and the 20th century specialist and the 13th century specialist, it's all broken up. And so here, I think both the fun and the challenge is being able to go beyond those boundaries and put things together in the ways that I like and the students want. And the flexibility, again, is really great.
Great. Becky?
Hi, sure. So my name is Becky Miller, and I'm a professor of music. In fact, I am an ethnomusicologist, which sounds kind of confessional, but ethnomusicology is the field of sort of music, and music meets anthropology. And so that's what my PhD is in. And so I teach classes at Hampshire in music and culture and music as culture, area studies, things like that. But one of the reasons one of the things I like very much about Hampshire is basically along the lines of what Elizabeth and Jim have been saying, which is the flexibility. And my particular profile at Hampshire is a poster child for that flexibility, because in addition to being an ethnomusicologist, I also teach courses in radio journalism, because before I became an academic, I was a public radio reporter and producer for NPR. So that's what I do. I have my music students and I have my radio journalism students.
Great. And Will?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hampshire. My name's Will Ryan. I'm the co-director of the writing program. In that role, one of my part of my work is to work with students across the curriculum and all courses and all sort of situations in Hampshire to help improve writing. And there's 2 or 3 of us in the writing program that do that work. I also teach courses in creative and analytical writing that kind of combine the two and that tend to end up around American studies. My own work that I publish is I write about outdoor recreation. And I write creative essays about that, but also historical essays about that. And I'm sort of the grandfather of the group. I've been here 40 years. And I really like, the part I like the best is they've kept me around that long. So I really look forward to working with y'all.
So one of you is going to introduce the course. Will, you want to tell us a little bit? Give us the general framework for the course. And I was going to ask you, what made you think about a course on pandemics? But, maybe that's obvious, but it might not be obvious what you all are doing with it. So, yeah.
Thanks. So I made a few notes to remember that. One of the things that really struck us all was an article that was in the Hampshire Daily Gazette about 3 weeks ago. It was a letter from a young woman to her grandmother about the pandemic in 1918 and how some of the people from the community in Leverett had died about it. And it was the letter itself wasn't an over emotional letter, but there was something about it that was just resonant with the way we're trying to figure out things today. It was almost like she was writing the letter to try to figure out what the world was coming to. This was supposed to be a homecoming from World War I, and what the homecoming was more death when people got home. So we were struck by that, and that sort of got us all talking about this. And a lot of us reached out to Elizabeth in particular, who's an epidemiologist, and we all try to get together to try to figure out what are some ways we can present material that will engage people, but also help the situation. That's the general thinking on the course. And we have a number of different perspectives. My perspective is historical, but it's not just historical. We want to look at the cultural, the social, the psychological, and of course the epidemiological aspects of this situation. And we want to try to also understand how pandemics land differently on different people, and not always in the ways that you think, right? And sometimes in these moments, what really turns, we often think of people in the medical profession as really at the pinnacle of society, and we see how much they're jeopardizing themselves to save other people. So it really got us all thinking about, how we got thinking about it. And there's really 2 parts to the course. This is sort of what we've been talking about. One part's the course to study and understand and research archivally through scientific data, but also through our literature, through journalism, through popular culture, through social media, and through interviewing people who are in the situation. So that's one part of the course. The second part of the course is more about our own expression of that. And we want to really open that up to things like panels, to different media, to podcasts, to journalism, to creative expression. And this is part of this is to express to the community and the world, I suppose, what we're finding. But the real thing driving this is that we really believe that creative expression helps us understand ourselves. And when sometimes when you don't understand things, Christoph, that just don't make sense, the first thing you do is try to give it language and try to make sense of it. So we're trying to do both those things through our creative expression. And that's sort of this is still a work in progress. We all have different skills. Jim is a interested in public history and history. Becky is ethnomusicology, ethnography, music, podcasts. I come from American Studies and Writing, and of course, Elizabeth comes from epidemiology and public health. So we feel like we really have a compendium of skills and perspectives that might make this really exciting course. So that's really where we're at.
Great, thanks a lot, Will. So I wanted to ask folks, and maybe Elizabeth and Jim could take up some of these questions, just about what are some of the key issues or questions that you want to address in the course. And maybe we also, maybe this is a separate question, but what do you want students to be doing in the course? Maybe let's take that question second, but what are the key issues and questions you think that are key to address in a course like this? Elizabeth, maybe you want, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Well, I was drawn to this course for some obvious reasons. Everyone, including myself, is thinking a lot about COVID-19 and the power of a disease to upend all aspects of life. But it also, for me, it seems like the perfect way to introduce students to my field of epidemiology, because we're all asking very natural and obvious questions about the spread of disease and the seriousness of disease. What will increase one's risk and what will lower it? And maybe, you found yourself wondering why someone became sick or hospitalized and someone else did not. And were they exposed to virus at work? Were they older? Did they have an underlying condition? If so, you're trying to make sense of something that's unseen by looking for patterns and things that are seen, in your observations. And that's really just data. And that's what epidemiologists, that's what scientists do. So my main motivation for the course was to use students' natural curiosity and desire to make sense of something that really matters to them and show them how epidemiology can help, how epidemiology has the tools to organize their questions and test their hypotheses. And I think Will put it well when he said, to give us a language to talk about it, we need a language. And epidemiology is that language for understanding the spread of disease. And one other point, it's somewhat unusual for first-year students to be exposed to epidemiology. Typically, epidemiology is taught in medical schools or in graduate schools. And when I came to Hampshire 20 years ago, I think I was the first epidemiologist hired by a small liberal arts college in the country, which is just another example of how forward-thinking Hampshire is. But one of the virtues of epidemiology is that it's really accessible and it relies heavily on one's common sense. You need to compare apples to apples, and causes come before effects, and correlation is not causation, and things like that. And the math is not complicated. You add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but yet it really forces you to develop your critical thinking skills. So I think it's a kind of a superb class for first-year students at a small liberal arts college, because it comes to them so naturally and they want to learn. And they really have the thinking, but they maybe don't have the language and the terminology for it yet. So hopefully pandemics will be that introduction for them.
I want to turn to Jim in a second, but I was just I read somewhere, maybe in the New York Times, that we're all epidemiologists now.
Yes.
Moment, right?
Yes, I know.
We're all tracking everything and paying attention to the possible course of a virus through, in ways I'm smiling about this, but of course it's also, heavy and tragic too. So speaking of the heavy and tragic, Jim, you want to talk a little bit about what a historian brings to this?
Yeah, certainly second exactly what Will said about finding the language, and Elizabeth too about the logic and the right questions to ask. And I think that's where, where history comes in. And sometimes we talk about learning from history, but I don't think anybody learns from history because look at the world. But, what I can teach you is maybe historical perspective. I mean, there's since we're all epidemiologists, when back in the 1930s, Carl Becker, when he was president of the American Historical Association, wrote a book called Every Man His Own Historian. And that's been an argument historians have made for 100 years at least, that, history is not about the past, it's about studying people. Mark Bloch called it the study of men in time, human beings in time. Because the fact something happened does not make it interesting. I mean, as an organizing principle. So the question is, what is our human nature like? To what extent is there a common human nature? To what extent does it change with time and place and culture? And one of the most important things that we try to do, I think, is give you a sense of perspective, because you've been reading things in the press, is this unprecedented, or will this episode, remake our entire society forever? Well, how would you know? I mean, there are various ways you could approach that, but I think historians always begin by asking, well, what's happened like this before, and what can that tell us? Not that things are the same, but to have a sense of where you are located, where your experience is located, compared to those who have gone before you, or those in different places. So one, the stock phrase of the American Historical Association nowadays is everything has a history. That means a couple of things. It could mean things like social change, like notions of traditional family or sexuality and gender roles. They haven't always been this way. Things have evolved over historical periods. So there's that. But I think then also in the sense that we're always trained to ask a kind of a question, when did this, ask us any question, and we'll try to say, well, when did it begin? What were the circumstances then? How are they like the ones today? How are they different? How do you know? And that's just so ingrained in our thinking that we take it for granted. And we realize that we have to teach students to think that way because it doesn't come naturally. But once you learn that, it can be a powerful tool. So you've seen pieces in the papers and magazines and blogs about historians talking about, obviously, the 1918 flu epidemic. But going back further, I mean, for example, there was a great plague in Athens 2,500 years ago. And it's been said that the plague really, we talk about Athens and Rome as the foundations of modern democracy and citizen government and so forth. And part of what they've said is that, well, this crisis really brought down Athenian democracy. It forced them to go toward a military dictatorship. They launched an unfortunate invasion that brought back more plague and so forth. Or, you all heard of the Black Death, obviously. I told my students, there's a famous set of Renaissance stories, the Decameron, 100 stories, 10 per day by Giovanni Boccaccio, who's an Italian writer. And when the plague hits in 1348, he uses as this frame for these amusing stories, a group of rich young men and women who go off to the countryside to avoid the dangerous city and amuse themselves by telling stories and eating and drinking wine and so forth. So there's that, we see the same thing today, the rich who are able to flee, the people in the cities who are stuck where the disease is heaviest. But he also starts with the beginning, a description of the plague, which is the best one we have. Epidemiologists have gone back to this before we had things like DNA, ancient DNA and fossils and things to look at the history of disease that way. They've tried to say, what is he describing? What does it match up with? But he also talks about the social consequences. Did people decide that God was punishing them and they should repent and change their ways? Did they decide the world was ending and it's time for a big party? Did they show solidarity? Did you take care of the sick, or did you abandon them? Did you abandon your parents, your children, and so forth? So these are deep-rooted questions. And then I think extending beyond that, obviously, there are all these questions in the last few centuries about disease. You could talk about the way the spread of disease by Europeans wiped out the populations of Central America and large areas of Native America and North America. What were the consequences of that socially? So when the Pilgrims come here and find New England abandoned, in some ways, I think it's a sign from God. This is now open for us to come and settle here. You could think about the tendency to look for blame. Maybe now it's anti-Chinese or anti-immigrant. We've seen it before. In the Middle Ages with the Black Death, sometimes they blamed the Jews and killed them or chased them out of town. In the late 19th century, you had fear of immigrants, as bearers of cholera and other types of diseases. Not always fully understood, obviously, or not to mention improperly attributed, but there are all these kind of questions I think we can ask that allow us to frame this in much broader terms. So that's really what we're hoping to do, I think, to give you a sense of yourself in this time and in relation to the larger sweep of world history.
Great, that's really helpful. I have some other questions for folks to ask, but just for what it's worth, very few Hampshire classes consist of, people like us sitting in front of a class talking at you for a long time, right? We're a place where we've got all sorts of things to say, but our students have all sorts of things to say, and they, you know, they jump right in. So don't, I know this is an awkward forum, like Zoom isn't the most, you know, I don't know, it's not the most cozy kind of place, but if you've got any questions, comments, just jump in there. Don't hesitate. So either jump in, raise your hand, add stuff to the chat, whatever you want. So your mention, Jim, of the Decameron is great because it ties together at least 3 elements, or maybe even 4 elements of your course, right? Epidemiology, of course, description of the Black Death,
Right.
the role of history in this, the role of literature too, right? Or how writing and literature connects, right? Maybe Will and Becky, you can talk a little bit. Maybe Becky, you can tell us a little bit about how the radio journalist aspect might fit into here, and maybe even what kinds of projects you imagine for the course to engage, you know, for students to do.
Sure. Well, one of the ways I found for me and for lots of other people, I think you probably all agree, that one of the best ways to make sense of what's going on in one's life is to understand how other people are making sense of it. And so that's one of the reasons why I believe I was put on the face of this earth to do ethnography, which is the study of culture and people through observation and interviewing and other means documentation. So to that end, to part of this course and part of how I see making sense of the COVID-19 catastrophe is through ethnography. And so part of the course will be teaching students an interview, how to observe. I don't know if the observation piece actually will work. It sort of depends on where we are with social distancing, but interviewing and documenting how people are making sense of their worlds in this age of COVID-19. So what I am thinking, I have a Div 3 student right now, that is to say a senior who is working on his senior project, which we call Division 3 at Hampshire. And he has, he's creating a series of podcasts about how people think about food in the COVID-19 era, and specifically food insecurity. But other projects and ways of thinking about this is what kind of creative engagements are people coming up with to express their concerns or thoughts or observations about, you know, the pandemic. So like, for example, I've been tracking, as you probably all have, all the various ways of creating music, you know, using Zoom or, you know, home recording studios, and then sharing the music with people on the internet. And I have a file that's growing daily with just tons of recently composed songs and music and collaborations. So, you know, that kind of creative engagement. How are people thinking about their work life? You know, some of us are working, others of us have lost our jobs, you know, so there's a very painful element here. So to understand what's going on with this pandemic, we can do ethnography, we can interview people, we can find out how this pandemic has impacted their lives in all these different ways. And then I guess that leads us to the outcome of the course, you know, projects and other people. We can all talk about different ways of, we're not sure, to be honest with you, what the final outcome is going to be, but I assume there's going to be writing, because at Hampshire you do a lot of writing. There's also the possibility of doing podcasts that document some of this, radio pieces, other creative expressions, and I think other of the faculty can speak to that. This is all work in progress too, by the way. So, you know, we're open to suggestions.
Let me, Will, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
No, I just want to respond. That's fine. Did you want?
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to just say sort of 3 things, the way the writing and my own work intersects with this. First off is it really, experiencing this pandemic really made me go back to history, like with Jim, and rethink some of the things I thought I knew. And a good example is in the 19th century with Eva and Uncle Tom's Cabin, with Beth and Little Women. We always think of the innocent death of young children as examples of how Christianity was promoted in the 19th century. But reading letters and stuff about the pandemic really made me think that maybe this is more about the way parents tried to come to grips with the terrible pain of losing a child. That, in other words, it wasn't an example of something as much as a palliative for the pain people were feeling. So as difficult as that was, it really drew me in to try to understand this more. And it really connects with what Becky says about empathy being at the base of what we're trying to figure out here. So that's a lot of the kind of writing we want to try to do. The other thing is that this is really a moving piece, as a lot of Christoph and other people have noted. And one of the things that's going to be happening in the next few months is we're going to elect a president. And the pandemic will be part of that national discourse. So one of the things that writing lets us do, and obviously the podcast and social media, is not simply to understand, but to communicate, to name, to report, to keep aware, to situate our own selves in response to that. So that's going to be a big part of things. So the writing isn't going to simply be about the past and understanding it for now. It's going to be trying to make sense of what's coming on the conveyor belt as we sit here. And the third thing I want to say is just about writing at Hampshire in general, and that is that it's a writing intensive place. You really are what you write. When you get here the first year, everybody feels like everybody knows more than you know, everybody uses big words. It doesn't matter. What really matters is how you can express yourself through writing, at least as far as I'm concerned. So one of the things about Hampshire is Christoph's right. We don't spend a lot of time talking at groups. We spend a lot of time discussing. We also spend a lot of time in individual conferences. So an introduction to writing, which is one of the other courses I teach, and other people in the writing program do, every student gets a writing conference for every paper they write. So a lot of the work that people do, the success of students in writing here is not magical. It's by building one-to-one relationships. So part of the deal about this course is, since I'm in the writing program, I'll spend a lot of time helping folks with writing and all elements of it. And all four of the courses will have a fair amount of writing in them. So it really puts people on the way to expressing themselves more clearly in every sense of the word.
So Will raises a good issue here, talking about some of the ways in which Hampshire works in general. So if folks have questions about that too, about any aspect, how does this work or what's this element? It doesn't have to be specifically about this course, though. I'm excited to hear more from my colleagues about how this course is going to run as well. Let me ask, so this is an ambitious course, right? You want to, in a way, teach students how to be epidemiologists, historians, radio journalists, and writers. Why bring all these things together in a single course, right? Why not have these be separate courses? Is it overly ambitious, do you think, or is there something that you can actually get done in a course like this that you couldn't get done in another way? I don't know. Maybe Jim, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, I'm thinking how to put this. I mean, I think what it shows, is aside from the flexibility, and again, if I were in a large university, I might not know these people I'm working with because we'd be in different buildings and different parts of the campus with no crossover. I think what it shows us maybe is that, as they say, the whole is larger than the sum of its parts, because we have here a combination of both confidence and humility. The humility is, I'm like everybody else. I'm reading the newspapers and trying to follow this stuff. I'm not Elizabeth. I'm not a natural scientist, but I know enough to read these things and I want to know more. And so, the question is, what can I as a historian bring to it? And I would think it's the perspective and certain ways of asking questions. And so I think that's what I mean about the humility and the confidence. I'm humble enough to know that this is not my field. I'm not pretending to be a scientist. I'm not pretending to teach you science, but I can bring my perspective to that. And I think the way we all put these things together really produces the kind of a model for the students as to how you can go about figuring out things in life. One thing I tell students when I teach history, this every man his own historian idea, is that, throughout your life, you're going to be made, the world is increasingly complex. throughout your lives, the students are going to be asked to make decisions about things they don't know about. When I vote for president, do I understand nuclear weapons policy? Do I understand global warming? Do I understand trade policy? And 100 other things. No, I don't. I understand pieces of them maybe, but what we're trying to do is to give you the skills, again, because Hampshire teaches transferable skills. They're going to be useful throughout your lives. We can put you in a position where you have enough logic and knowledge to ask the right questions and then to pursue knowledge on your own. So I would see the course as kind of a model of what we want the student and the citizen to be.
Mm-hmm.
May not be specific to this course, but it's an example of how that works.
That's great. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and I'll say related to that, as an epidemiologist, I think a lot of the questions that sound like epidemiologic questions are ones that have come up before in history, and that I'm hoping to learn from Jim, because I don't know if my notions of what happened before are myths or they're simplifications, but some of the questions, such as using the plasma of people who have recovered from COVID-19, whether that can help people who are, especially the very sick right now, to recover from the disease. And that's reminiscent of the inoculations and of the smallpox, around smallpox in the late 19th or 18th, and probably before that, I don't know. Our president has really been pushing the idea of vaccines early, and doesn't understand the long process by which we approve a vaccine for mass distribution. And that makes me think of during the polio epidemics of the 1950s, and when finally a vaccine became available, and they gave it to all these kids, and then it turned out that some of it had been poorly manufactured, which later led to the development of the FDA and more power in that agency. And kids developed polio and died. And it was rushed because just as now, people were really, really concerned, and they just wanted a vaccine. The testing now, and the number of false negatives and false positives, and how are these early tests that have been rushed out, understandably, are not perfect. And then what do we do with that imperfect information? And that's so reminiscent of the early years of the HIV epidemic, when the first tests were, there were a lot of false positives and false negatives. And so what did we do with that information? Anyway, there's so much to learn from what happened before, even with our newer technology and our newer means of communication and so on. And so I'm not sure again, I look to Jim for help in understanding what is authentic history and what maybe has been mythologized over time.
Yeah, and I look to you, if I could throw in two examples. We talked about the perfect example of this, what you do with new scientific treatments, and how you decide what's success and what's not. And so I don't know if you've heard of Jonathan Edwards. He was a famous theologian and preacher, known as a kind of a fire and brimstone revival preacher, hardcore
woods too, right?
Pardon?
Sorry, from our neck of the woods.
Yeah, he was a preacher in Northampton, up the road from here, and active in Northampton and Connecticut. And he was, believed in sinful human beings and God's punishment, but he was also a man who believed in joy and marriage and culture and science. And he was called to become president of Princeton University. So he went down there, and there's a smallpox epidemic raging, and being a man of science, he had himself inoculated, and he died. Not from the smallpox, but from the bad vaccination. That didn't prove it was a bad policy. It just didn't go well. Or for example, Elizabeth would tell you too, it's only fairly recently in historical time that we understand disease at all. So cholera, which we now know comes from contaminated water supplies, was a mystery. And there was no germ theory of history at first. People didn't know what caused disease. And some professor, I always used to read, who didn't believe in the germ theory of history, drank a beaker of infected water to show that nothing would happen, and nothing happened to him. But he survived by chance. It doesn't mean his theory was right. But this is the kind of thing when there's pressure to find a cure or there's resistance to new ideas, you want to ask what we can learn about these processes. How can we make the right decisions and not make snap political decisions or emotional decisions, or be discouraged by bad results, or jump too quickly for the wrong thing?
So I want to ask a question that I heard from another, actually I heard from a student in one form and then a parent in another. And this is, that this interdisciplinary seminar that you all have, that you're putting together, in a way treats, models a student who's really interested in, or who will develop a kind of breadth of knowledge, who will know some epidemiology, know some history, know some journalism and ethnography, know how to write and think creatively. Is there a worry, and in a way that models also the way a lot of Hampshire concentrations happen. A lot of Hampshire concentrations are interdisciplinary. So you might have a student who's doing epidemiology and radio journalism, or I guess as Becky's student has it right now, is doing something like that, right? Epidemiology and radio journalism, yeah? So this is what the parent asked, is there also the possibility of going in depth in any of these, not just, staying a little bit of this, a little bit of this? What opportunities are there for that? I don't know, maybe Becky, maybe you want to talk about that, or anybody else really?
Sure. Well, when you come to Hampshire the first year, it's been likened to, not the first year, but the Hampshire experience has been likened to a diamond. It starts narrow and focused with our seminar, and you've kind of focusing on a topic, but through a variety of different perspectives, which introduces you to possibilities for what you might want to concentrate in, which forms the broader part of the diamond in your, what we call Division 2, your middle 2 years of college, right? And that's where you kind of broaden things out. You take courses that speak to your interests, your concentration, major concentration. And then by Div 3, your senior year, it again kind of focuses in on the smaller, more focused question, thus forming the top part of that diamond. So to get back to what Christoph was asking, this seminar and the structure of these seminars, yes, we aim to teach the notion of the experience, the issues specific to pandemics, but through several different ways of thinking about it. So that's broad. But at the same time, we're also thinking about these issues in terms of critical thought and analytical thought. So we're asking students to think critically and analytically and write about it from different perspectives. So you come away with maybe some understanding of epidemiology, maybe historical background, and then there's a focus as well, depending on which of our classes you wind up being. And I could speak to the structure of this course if you're interested.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay, sure. All right. So again, this is all we're still developing it, but the class will meet 3 times a week, each for an hour and 20 minutes. The first meeting of the class will be, we'll divide the students into 4 equal sections. And so Elizabeth will have one section, I will have a section. I have a black and white cat that looks exactly like yours, Pascal. Wow. I thought that was my cat there. That's so weird, sorry. Will will have a section, and Jim will have a section. So the first meeting of the class in the week will be an hour and 20 minutes where we meet as a section and we drill down in our particular areas. The second meeting of the class in a week will be the entire group, right? And we'll have a large, maybe a lecture, or we're not really big on lecturing at Hampshire, I should tell you. So when I say lecture, I kind of cringed when I said that, but more likely a discussion seminar that involves all the students. Maybe we'll have a guest lecturer, or or one of us will take it. We're still kind of figuring that out. The third meeting of the class will involve sort of 2 things. An introduction to Hampshire. So students will meet, like, for example, the director of the library, who will walk students through how to do database research, for example, or somebody from the writing center that, talks about the various opportunities for help with your writing that exist at Hampshire. The second, and then the other part of that third meeting is that I think we're going to do a series of interviews with staff about how their lives have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So sort of an oral history / ethnographic, like public interview, which hopefully will shed light on how people from different positions, different walks of life, different class orientations, and different occupations have experienced you know, this massive thing we're going through. So that's kind of the broad plan, and subject to change, but that's kind of how we're perceiving it.
Great. I have many more things I could ask my colleagues about this fascinating course, but I'm curious if folks have, folks who are visiting Hampshire, as it were, have any questions for the people that we have on our panel today about their specific fields or about Hampshire in general, anything like that before we? Well, again, if anything, yeah, Elizabeth, do you have a comment? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add to what Becky said that I'm in the School of Natural Science. I know most about the sciences, but we often get students who come in knowing they want to go to medical school or that they want to study chemistry. And you can do that, right? You know, it's very focused for medical school. I think there are probably like now 12 or 13 courses that you have to take. And so you can dig right into that and get those done before your Div 3 year when you focus on an independent project. And because of the 5 colleges, there's so many courses available to students. So, you know, we have a chemist and an organic chemist on our faculty in the sciences, and students usually say interested in chemistry work really closely with them, and they will advise, okay, this course in the 5 colleges would be really good. So as well as courses in the other sciences like physics and biology, which are really important too. But in terms of focusing, that we often get students who really know what they want to do, and and the flexibility of our system allows for that as well.
Yeah, we have the opportunity then to take very Hampshire-specific courses of the kind that are often interdisciplinary. Or, of course, you know, I know in the natural sciences, there's also, as you say, you know, sort of there's physics 1, physics 2, you know, chemistry 1, chemistry 2, but you also have the entire resources of the 5 colleges at your disposal. So that's important too. There's a question here in the chat that says, will the course on pandemics be exploring the psychosociological aspects of pandemics at all, as far as you know right now? So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it's really a moving situation, but I think the interiority of folks in this experience is really turned our little world upside down. A good example is just Noreen, my wife, is a trauma therapist at Bay State Hospital. And one of the things that they're doing there is they're reaching out to medical providers who are meeting with patients and to try to talk about their own anxieties and trepidations about being in this role, even as they feel an overwhelming need to contribute to the greater good. So I think one of the things that's occurring is people are undergoing a lot of mixed. I know myself. I mean, I change the way I feel about once every 10 minutes. During these days, and I think that's absolutely an area that we want to pursue. That's one of the reasons why Becky came up with the idea of interviewing the public interview. Is we're less interested in defining it than we are trying to hear it and experience it and try to make sense of it. So that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to, Becky, about your idea about interviewing the staff and so forth, and other people who went through this. So yeah, absolutely, that's really part of what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to use social media as a way to understand this as well, because social media has its own accelerant effect, as we all know, on these feelings as well, that people feel like they're being in a community, but are they really in a community? So there's a lot of, and I hate to use this word, but there's a lot of exciting things about this awful thing. So in that respect, so yes.
Yeah, I imagine that, you know, the radio journalistic piece digs into those aspects too. Yeah. There's another question here. On the previous question, you know, I so wish I could be part of this this course too, because there's so many philosophical aspects here, ethical issues, epistemological issues about knowledge and belief, ontological issues about what kinds of things there are in the world. A virus, I mean, not to be too, a virus is an odd thing, and the way it passes through bodies. These are all very interesting and rich questions.
Well,
Another question in the
Christoph,
chat.
let me just interrupt to say will be #1 guest in our We've signed you up.
We do that a lot at Hampshire. We call on our colleagues, and they're generally pretty good-natured about it. So there's another question here in the chat that says, can you talk a little bit more about the faculty committee and other support resources for students as they choose internships, projects, future courses in Division 2 and Division 3? So I think this is broadly a question, if I understand it right, about kind of our advising system and how it works to help students with with their coursework and with life outside of Hampshire. Anybody want to take that up? I've got thoughts about it, but
Elizabeth, you should tell the story about the student in Division 3. That was a good story yesterday.
Which one was that?
About the student who is in South America and the
Yeah. Okay. So I have for many years taught an intercession January term course with an alum who's a physician, and she has started a nonprofit in El Salvador, a focus on cervical cancer screening. And we have taken groups of Hampshire students down to El Salvador for many years, and they work on her projects, and we travel to these remote areas. And one year, one of the students was took note of how when we went to these remote places, and often we're having clinics in these somebody's home in their bedroom, or in schools on school tables, that there was a need for a portable exam table that we could carry with us. It would be more comfortable and so on. And so she was a pre-med student at the time, and she decided to dedicate her Div 3 to building this a portable exam table, which required her to learn more about material science and design, and then use some of her background in physics and so on. And so at the end of the year, she had this very kind of crude table that folded up and everything. That it was a lattice of bicycle tire tubes and PVC pipes. But the really beautiful thing was that she then passed the project on to another student who had gone the next year at El Salvador. And that student had more of a background in fabrication and worked at, we have a fabrication studio at Hampshire called the Lemelson Center. And by the end of that, in fact, I think a whole course was devoted, a Hampshire course was dedicated to refining this product. And there's, this was like 4 or 5 years ago that the second student finished her Div 3 on it. And they're still pilot testing and sending out for testing different beds. And occasionally I get an email from somebody in the highlands of Guatemala or from Southeast Asia who said, I heard about your bed project and I can't find them anywhere on the, I can't find them anywhere to buy. Can I buy one of yours? And so we send them one. And it's, it's such a beautiful example of, I think, the flexibility of our program, that a student had an idea and the passion to pursue it. And I think it's emblematic of the entrepreneurial nature of our students. I mean, they see problems and they want to be part of solutions. And even when it's kind of far afield. I mean, this student now she's finished medical school, she's a pathologist, but she is continuing to work on this project because she just cares about it so deeply.
That's great. Maybe I could say just something about advising in general. I mean, so every student, when you come in, of course, you're kind of assigned an advisor, right? We have to find this somehow. But after the end of your first year, you will locate a committee of advisors. This becomes what we call your Division 2 committee, the committee for your concentration. And those two people are these are people you meet with a lot. who help you to choose courses, who help you to figure out, okay, these are your goals. Well, I would suggest that you take these courses, you do these projects. Oh, I know someone you could work on, that you could go pursue an internship with. So those committee members are really key, and students meet with them a lot. The same thing at the Division III level, at the senior thesis level. You have a committee generally of 2 people, could be more. Sometimes there are 5 college people from the other colleges on those committees. And those people work with you very closely week by week to help you complete your project, to help you think about what you're going to do after you leave Hampshire, to work with you on what you're going to be doing during your summers. So it's very, very close relationship, and with very knowledgeable people who can really help direct you, and who are less interested generally in telling you what to do than in really helping you explore what you're able to do and the various possibilities that you have at Hampshire, the 5 colleges, and outside of that. Okay, let's see. So we're nearing, we still have a bit of time, but we're nearing the end of our time, and Karen has a note in the chat that says, if anyone has a question following this session, you can send it to me and I can redirect it to the presenters. I'll put my email address in there too. And yeah, I see your hand, Becky. You want to say something too?
Yeah, just about the advising. We've talked a lot about how flexible Hampshire is and how there's an emphasis on independent work. And all that is true, and all that is what kind of makes Hampshire a special place. But I want to stress that none of this, it's not like you come to Hampshire and then you're just expected to produce and just to know this stuff. You're not. You work with, students work directly with faculty, as Christoph already kind of outlined, very closely throughout your 4 years. So, everything's in negotiation and collaboration, and students are, I think that's the part of Hampshire which makes it unique and accessible, is that, if you ever have a question or a problem or you don't know what to do, you always have a committee, a chair and a member in Division II and Division III of faculty who are there to meet with you whenever whenever needed, basically. So there's a lot of support and, collaboration and discussion. And of course, in your first year as well, you have an advisor too.
And just to follow up on that, one of the advantages for students with that is, I have a lot of students, I know Jim and Elizabeth and Christoph and Becky do as well, that I worked with in my first year seminar, and I worked with all through Hampshire for 4 years. So it's really, you really see students, and students have relationships longitudinally. So it's not, performance is not about how you did in this course. Performance is what you've made, how you've managed to grow over 3 or 4 years. So it kind of changes the way we think of things in that respect.
That's one of the great things. It's why we support narrative evaluations instead of grades, because a sequence of B's or A's or C pluses or whatever doesn't tell you very much, but a set of narratives that track you over the course of your career and really give broad explanations and broad and deep explanations for what you did and how well you did and what aspects you need to work on. Those are, that's really valuable information. Any last questions before we go? Anybody have anything they want to either shout out or put in the chat or anything? No? Okay. Well, I've put my email address in the chat, and so has Karen. So if you want to reach out to any of us with any questions about anything Hampshire, perfectly happy to do it. As Becky said, we are generally, for our students and also for other people, very reachable people these days. And I'm not sure we want to continue this forever, but these days, by phone, by text, by Zoom, at 8 o'clock in the morning, at 10 o'clock at night, we don't always do that, but right now we really want it. We're trying to make it work for our students, and we know that students are in different time zones and everything. So anyway, Elizabeth has put up her information there too. So feel free to get in touch with us. And
yeah, I don't know how to do that. So
that's okay. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody.
Great to meet you all, and look forward to hopefully seeing you in the fall.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Stay safe.